Catherine Ham, Brian Wilson, Brian Neiman, today's newsmakers, and you. The Morning Majority, 630.
WMAL.
6:07 on WMAL. Happy Friday to you. Brian Neiman, Mary Catherine Ham, Brian Wilson out today. Still to come on the show this morning, Tom Rivers, ABC News correspondent from London, will join us in about a half hour. We'll get into the News Corp scandal that is raging in the UK and maybe spreading here to the U.S. And we got Brett Baer from the Fox News Channel, who apparently is a lunatic, according to some White House officials in emails released yesterday. We'll ask him about that. And Congressman Steve King from Iowa, also in the 7 o'clock hour. Talk to him at 7:36. Peter Morici joins us now, University of Maryland economist, overall good guy. I'm very glad you're on the show this morning because there's a lot to talk about. I noticed yesterday there seemed to be, turning up the volume, at least when it comes to people saying, hey, there could be some major economic headaches if we don't raise the debt ceiling. I know Jamie Dimon, the CEO of J.P. Morgan, said you better do it. Doug Holtz-Egan was on Larry Kudlow's show, who was the director of the CBO of the Bush administration, says the money's going to run out in a hurry. You've been on this program before saying that it's not necessarily the end of the world. What do you think is going to happen?
If you default, if you do what Tim Geithner says they're going to do and is not pay the bills, it will be the end of the world.
All right.
The question is, do they have to do that?
Right.
There's a guy running around from one of the think tanks who seems to think he can precisely predict, what revenues are going to come in and so on and so forth.
Right.
That's a lot of nonsense. Every month we try to predict the government deficit and get it wrong. It's one of the worst, most badly predicted numbers there are. We can pay the interest on the debt, but we can't pay all our vendors, so that technically puts us in default. However, there are other options they have. The Federal Reserve is sitting on $1.6 trillion in government bonds, which counts against the ceiling.
Okay,
those can be sold to raise cash, and it doesn't count against the debt.
Who's going to buy them?
Well, if you are continuing business as usual, I think you're okay. Let me explain. In quantitative easing, essentially, the Treasury has been printing bonds, selling them to the public, and the Federal Reserve has been printing money and buying back the bonds. It bought back 80% of the bonds issued over the 7-month period of QE2.
Gotcha.
We were monetizing the debt. Fine. Now, the Treasury can print money and put it to pay its bills. It's really, computer transactions, but pay its bills because it has the authority to print money. It's the U.S. government. And that would flood the economy with too much money, but the Federal Reserve could turn around and sell those bonds and buy the money back.
All right, won't that just kill the dollar, the value of the dollar?
Well, it depends on how it's explained. If you explain it the way I just did, it's just a continuation of QE2. Whereas before, Treasury was printing the bonds, it was selling the bonds, and the Federal Reserve was printing the money to buy them back. We were monetizing the debt. Now we'll do the reverse. Unfortunately, by saying you have no options, and that the world is going to come to an end, the world believes it. And psychology is so important that unless they start talking about a plan B, and I don't mean McConnell's scheme, that would work, by the way. I mean, it would get us out of it for the short term.
Right.
Then it's going to be too late on August 2nd to do that because the markets will have unraveled, and so forth. Now, we're all talking about this like we really know. Remember, this is an uncharted area on the map. We've never been there. That's a very separate issue, though, is downgrading. Even if we get through this, we're still likely to have our debt downgraded sometime next year, simply because before this ever emerged, the bond rating agencies were saying unless you have a real plan to reduce the deficit, which is too large, you're going to be downgraded. And the reality is the kinds of reductions in the deficit they are talking about are insufficient. And so that we're going to emerge next February when we print the budget again with even more problems. For example, they're operating on the president's budget, which assumes 4% growth for the next 4 years. Well, we're just not growing that fast, which means tax revenues are going to be grow more slowly, and entitlements problems are going to grow more rapidly. And so, they're really not talking about, the president talks about a grand deal. Spending is up $900 billion above what was required for inflation over the last 4 years. If you cut that in half, you'd get savings of $4.5 trillion over 10 years. And on top of that, you probably can do some tax increases. You just can't do them Barack Obama's way and have the Congress, the House swallow them. And so, my feeling is we should be talking about a $6 or $7 trillion deal. And it shouldn't be that hard to do, but nobody knows how to cut spending on the Hill, not even the Republicans.
Peter, it sounds like you're a little bit in the we're doomed camp with me, which I have not been as concerned about default in this deal as I have been about if you can't actually make some cuts doing this deal, what that portends for the future, which seems to be what you're talking about. I mean, how long is it before we have our own austerity package we have to vote on? I mean, it's...
Well, first of all, we're not Greece, and we
Right.
don't belong to the European Union, and there's no higher authority, so to speak.
Right.
But we do print our own money. At the end of the day, the United States can print money. Any government can. That's what separates us from other countries. But at some point, the money does become valueless. I mean, the Federal Reserve has been printing a lot of money over the last, 7-8 months, excluding July. And the world has accepted it. Central banks have put it on their books. With no visible alternative to the dollar as a reserve currency, that can go on for a while. But at some point, the Chinese are going to get smart. They're going to let their currency revalue and make it convertible. And then the yuan becomes a viable substitute for the dollar. At that point, the world will be less eager to hold dollars, and the value of the currency could slip precipitously. And so the way we default is very much the way Greece would default if it had its own currency. It wouldn't default. It's just the value of the bonds would sink dramatically against all the other currencies in the world. And that's what I see happening in the end, is that the dollar becomes worth a great deal less. All of a sudden you have to pay $300 a barrel for oil, and you're paying $9 a gallon for gas.
Right. I mean, it's crippling to the economy if you do that.
Well, this is what happens when you don't grow. This is what happens when you have policies that don't permit the economy to grow, and the president won't take the steps necessary to get it growing.
No, I completely understand that, and I get that, but I'm wondering if you play this game and you don't raise the debt ceiling and you're forced for the Treasury to just print money or whatever, and the dollar is already starting to lose value, that it may be the best alternative just to raise the debt ceiling. You have no other choice.
What I'm getting, there's the short-term problem of the debt ceiling. And the Tea Party wanting real action on the deficit. And then there's the long-term problem of all these deficits. And what I'm saying to you is that the Tea Party can hold us up on this and say, all right, unless we get real cuts, we're going to not raise the debt ceiling. So we're going to give them real cuts. But what I'm saying is, even if you gave them the best possible package, I wrote an article about this earlier in the week, that could come out of these negotiations, it's not going to be enough given the long-term structural problems of this economy. This president is tone deaf and has all the Republicans in Congress about the real problems facing this country. We have a woefully inefficient government and healthcare sector compared to other countries, which is a terrible burden. It isn't that we don't need government. It's our government governs so badly. That's the first thing. The second thing, there's the issue of the huge trade deficit and the fact that this president won't let us develop domestic oil and gas in a commodity-driven era.
All right. Can you hold on a second? Because I want to ask you about a couple things. Number one, the balanced budget amendment, if that would make a difference. You got a few seconds?
Yeah, sure.
All right, cool. Peter Morici is with us, University of Maryland economist. Get back to him in a second. Brian Wilson's off today. Peter Morici, University of Maryland economist, is with us. The Republicans have been talking a lot about balanced budget amendment. They want a constitutional amendment to put that in place. I know Mitch McConnell was out talking about it yesterday, essentially begging 20 Democrats to get on board. They think long-term that could be the real game changer. Do you see that as something that could actually really make a difference long-term on our structural problem with debt and deficits if there is a balanced budget amendment, or is it just another game?
Do you remember when the Argentines played the game of linking the dollar, their currency one-to-one to the dollar, and they went through dramatic deflation?
I don't know the whole details of it, but I remember
how they adopted that arbitrary rule to keep themselves from printing too much money. This is a similar arbitrary rule. First of all, how could we ever get to a balanced budget when the best of these guys can do is $300 billion a year? That's what $3 trillion is over 10 years. And a lot of those are further out in time. So they're really talking about a $2 trillion, $200 billion cut against a $1.6 billion deficit. Mm-hmm. The fact is, the people that advocate this couldn't live with it. They only advocate it because they know it will never happen. It's a grand exercise in hypocrisy. If they're interested, I remember Tip O'Neill saying to Ronald Reagan, you want a balanced budget? You give me a balanced budget, and I'll have it voted on in the House in 24 hours. And Ronald Reagan never tabled one. And that's what Barack Obama.
Hold on. Did we have a balanced budget during the Clinton administration? or is that just
I
smoke
think
and
we
mirrors?
did.
Yeah,
I'm talking about, during the Reagan administration, we had these huge deficits because of his tax cuts in the early years. But that was a very different era, and deficits had very different meaning. We weren't borrowing the money from the Chinese; we were borrowing it from ourselves. The Japanese were buying some of the debt to keep their currency low, but not on the scale that we're dealing with right now.
So, but what I'm saying is, if you were able to balance budgets in the 90s, why can't you do it today?
Well, because government spending has grown by $1.1 trillion over the last 4 years.
Wouldn't it force them to cut it if they had a balanced budget amendment?
Well, yeah, but I don't think they would. I don't think in the end of the day they would be able to get it done. Why do you believe that they would be able to get it done when even the Tea Party can't table a balanced budget?
Well,
they can't even propose what a balanced budget would look like. I guess, and the other thing is there are reasons to have deficits, and there are reasons to have surpluses, depending on where you are in the business cycle. It's a silly rule. What I'm getting at with Argentina is they said, well, we don't have the self-discipline to behave ourselves, so we're going to impose an arbitrary rule, which was very damaging to them. And I think that a balanced budget amendment would be damaging.
Well,
but if you can't tie their hands and they can't do it voluntarily, where does that put us again?
Well, on the road to decline.
right back at doomed. Dang it!
Well, I'm sorry, but I mean,
know.
think about what's going on down there. Let's just look at healthcare. Healthcare is jumping way. Healthcare is what's driving a lot of this deficit. Not all of it, but it's driving it. It's not the wars. It's healthcare. We pay $800 per person for drugs. The Germans pay $400. The British $200. You can never talk about regulating drug prices and reworking the patent system in the United States because every Republican will say to you, who will pay for the research? Wine, wine, wine. It's more like who will pay for all those TV ads. That's where the money goes. They just manage the patent system better in Germany than we do. But nobody really wants to look at any kind of real regulation in the healthcare sector. I mean, what kind of business spends a third of its revenues on overhead? Answer, the health insurance business. That's absurd. I mean, a third of your health insurance money is going into, moving forms around? That's obscene. That's what I'm talking about, an example of terribly high overhead in the United States. They don't want to take on problems like that. Likewise, the Obama administration's answer to regulatory failure is more regulatory failure. Sarbanes-Oxley is terribly expensive. It is driving business from Wall Street to London and Amsterdam in the form of new IPOs. Okay?
Everybody's got a problem.
Sarbanes-Oxley was supposed to get rid of accounting frauds. Well, the last financial crisis that we just had was another batch of accounting frauds. The sieves the banks create, it didn't work. But you can't talk to Obama about getting rid of it.
Does anything make you optimistic that we
Right now, watching those guys, I was talking to Wolf yesterday. I was on his show. And watching those guys, behave the way they do, it's like squabbling in the newsroom. If we behaved the way they're behaving right now at the university, we would be removed. If a dean behaved the way Cantor behaves and a president behaved the way Obama behaved. I love Nancy Pelosi. CEOs stalk out of rooms.
Well, you don't think CEOs stalk out of rooms during negotiations? Of course they do, all the time. You got to be kidding me.
The world is changing. You're not allowed to behave that way. Ask Bill Hess. He runs the station. You're not allowed.
You don't think Jamie Dimon's ever stormed out of a meeting before?
I don't think he'll storm out of a meeting with Blankenfein from Goldman Sachs, and that is what the President of the United States did to the Speaker of the House. Hey, fella. I'm so disappointed in Boehner. The Constitution requires that the House of Representatives be where revenue and spending bills originate. Mm-hmm. Okay? They are responsible for determining how much the country spends in taxes, not the president. When is he going to? And then the president can either accept it or reject it. But they are the place where it originates. Whereas the president is convening these meetings at the White House as if he's in charge. The Speaker of the House is the head of a branch of government, which is responsible for the budget.
Well, they passed a budget. They passed Paul Ryan's budget, the House did.
Well, my feeling is that we're now to the point where they need to send the Senate a budget that will keep the government from closing August 2nd, and then the Senate can vote it up or down, and if the Democrats don't want to pass it up there, then it's on them. But what's happened is the president has put it on the Republicans by the way he's postured in these meetings. Mm-hmm. Think about what Cantor said. He said, where's your plan? The president says, I gave it to Boehner. And Boehner then has a spokesman come out and say he didn't give me no plan. He should have basically walked out.
So you want him to walk out now?
In front of a bunch of reporters and said, "I'm sorry, the President of the United States hasn't given me a plan, and that is the basic problem." Instead of saying, "Well, we're given a choice between higher taxes, smoke and mirrors," he should have called them.
Yeah. All right.
Do you remember how Gingrich got called about the plane visit with Clinton?
I got to go because I got to go run and buy my gun and my canned goods because I feel like I'm due.
No. We're going to get a new. These guys are going to have their day, and the next generation is going to kick in, and we're going to get better leaders.
All right.
We've been through this before.
All right. I like that. I'll end on that note. Thank you, Peter.